The train's whistle screamed, slicing through the Montana dusk like a blade through silk, but it was the stranger in Evelyn Harper's seat who stopped her heart cold. She stood frozen in the plush aisle of the Northern Pacific's first-class carriage, her gloved hand tightening around her suitcase handle, as she stared at the woman sprawled across her reserved seat. This was no ordinary thief. Sun-bleached hair spilled from under a worn Stetson, and her denim jacket carried the dust of a life Evelyn could scarcely imagine. "Excuse me," Evelyn said, her voice sharp as the cut of her tailored silk dress. "You're in my seat." The woman looked up, her green eyes glinting with a mix of defiance and amusement. She was young, maybe 25, with a face that bore the weathered beauty of open plains and hard work. "Your seat, huh?" she drawled, not budging an inch. "Didn't see no name on it." Evelyn's jaw tightened. As the only daughter of railroad magnate Theodore Harper, she wasn't accustomed to being challenged, especially not by some ranch hand who looked like she'd ridden straight out of a cattle drive. The carriage hummed with the low chatter of other passengers, their eyes darting toward the confrontation like moths to a flame. Evelyn felt the weight of their stares, the unspoken judgment of her wealth and privilege, but she refused to flinch. "I booked this seat weeks ago," Evelyn said, her tone icy. "First class. Number 12A. Move." The ranch girl tilted her head, her lips curling into a half-smile that was equal parts infuriating and disarming. "Name's Clara," she said, as if that explained everything. "And I reckon I'm stayin' right here unless you got a better story than I paid for it." Evelyn's pulse quickened, a mix of outrage and something else, something she couldn't name, stirring in her chest. She wasn't used to this, to someone meeting her fire with fire. Growing up in the gilded cage of Chicago's elite, her life had been a carefully curated script. Finishing school, charity galas, and a future mapped out by her father's expectations. But this Clara, with her rough edges and unapologetic grin, was a variable Evelyn hadn't accounted for. Before she could fire back, the train lurched violently, throwing Evelyn forward. Her suitcase clattered to the floor, and Clara's hand shot out, catching her arm to steady her. The touch was brief but electric, sending a jolt through Evelyn's veins. She yanked her arm away, her cheeks flushing as the train screeched to a halt, the carriage plunging into a tense silence. "What in God's name?" Evelyn started, but a conductor's voice boomed through the carriage, cutting her off. "Ladies and gentlemen, remain calm. We've stopped due to a track obstruction. Please stay seated." Clara raised an eyebrow, still lounging in Evelyn's seat. "Well, ain't that a twist? Looks like we're stuck together for a spell." Evelyn's lips parted, but no words came. She was a Harper, heir to an empire that spanned steel and steam, yet here she was, undone by a ranch girl in a stalled train. She sank into the seat across from Clara, her mind racing. This trip to Seattle was supposed to be her escape, a chance to oversee her father's new rail line and prove she was more than a decorative heiress. But now, with Clara's gaze locked on hers, she felt like she was stepping into uncharted territory. The carriage buzzed with murmurs as passengers speculated about the delay. Evelyn ignored them, her attention fixed on Clara, who was now casually inspecting a frayed thread on her sleeve. "You always this bold?" Evelyn asked, her voice softer now, curiosity creeping in despite herself. Clara chuckled, a low warm sound that seemed to fill the space between them. "Gotta be out where I'm from. You don't survive the plains by playing shy." "And where exactly are you from?" Evelyn pressed, leaning forward slightly. She told herself it was to assert control, but the truth was, she wanted to know more about this woman who'd upended her carefully ordered world in minutes. "Little place called Redstone," Clara said, her eyes distant for a moment. "Ranchland. My pa's been running cattle there since I was a kid. Ain't much, but it's home." Evelyn tried to picture it, wide skies, endless fields, a life unbound by the suffocating rules of her own world. She envied it in a way, though she'd never admit it. "And what brings you to a first-class carriage?" she asked, her tone carrying a hint of suspicion. Clara's grin returned, sly and knowing. "Got a job waitin' in Seattle. Stable work for a big outfit. Saved every penny for this ticket." She patted the seat. "Figured I'd treat myself to a taste of your world for once." Evelyn's lips twitched, almost a smile, but she caught herself. My world, she echoed, the words tinged with bitterness. You think it's all glamour, don't you? Ain't it? Clara shot back, her gaze piercing. Fancy dresses, private cars, folks waiting on you hand and foot? Evelyn looked away, her fingers tracing the edge of her suitcase. Clara's words stung because they weren't entirely wrong. But they didn't see the cage, the expectations, the marriage proposals from men she didn't love, the constant scrutiny. She'd spent her life playing the perfect daughter, but deep down, she craved something real, something that felt like freedom. The train's whistle blew again, signaling a restart, and the carriage jolted forward. Evelyn's eyes met Clara's, and for a moment neither spoke. There was a current between them, unspoken but undeniable, like the hum of the tracks beneath their feet. You gonna keep fighting me for this seat? Clara asked, breaking the silence with a teasing lilt. Evelyn arched an eyebrow, her composure returning. I don't lose, Clara. But I'll let you keep it for now. Clara laughed, and the sound was like sunlight breaking through clouds. Evelyn felt her guard slip just a fraction, and it terrified her. This was no ordinary journey, and Clara was no ordinary stranger. As the train picked up speed, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change course entirely. The train rattled through the night, its rhythm a steady pulse against the tension simmering between Evelyn and Clara. Moonlight spilled through the carriage windows, casting silver shadows across Clara's face as she leaned back in the stolen seat, her hat now resting on her knee. Evelyn sat opposite, her posture rigid, but her eyes betrayed her, darting to Clara's calloused hands, her easy confidence, the way she seemed to belong everywhere and nowhere at once. You stare like you're trying to solve a puzzle, Clara said, her voice low, teasing. What's the matter, Heiress? Ain't never seen a girl like me before. Evelyn's cheeks warmed, but she held Clara's gaze. I've seen plenty, she lied, smoothing her skirt to mask her unease. Just not one so brazen. Clara's laugh was soft, almost intimate, and it sent a shiver down Evelyn's spine. She hated how easily this woman unsettled her, how Clara's presence made the air feel charged, like the moment before a storm. Evelyn prided herself on control. Years of navigating her father's boardrooms and society's expectations had honed her into someone unshakable. Yet here she was, rattled by a ranch girl with a smirk and a story. Brazen's one way to put it, Clara said, leaning forward, her elbows resting on her knees. But out where I'm from, you don't get far by hiding who you are. You gotta own it or the world'll chew you up. Evelyn's lips parted, but she stopped herself, unsure how to respond. There was truth in Clara's words, a raw honesty that cut through the polished veneer of Evelyn's life. She'd spent years hiding, her thoughts, her desires, the parts of herself that didn't fit the Harper mold. Clara, though, seemed to wear her truth like armor. The carriage door slid open, and a conductor appeared, his mustache twitching as he scanned the passengers. Tickets, please, he called, his voice clipped. Evelyn reached for her purse, but Clara was faster, pulling a crumpled ticket from her pocket and handing it over with a grin. The conductor frowned, inspecting it. This is for coach, miss. You're in first class. Clara shrugged, unfazed. Figured I'd upgrade myself for a bit. No harm done, right? Evelyn's eyes narrowed. So Clara wasn't just bold, she was reckless. The conductor's expression hardened. You'll need to return to your assigned car, miss. Now. Clara stood, stretching lazily, but Evelyn caught the flicker of disappointment in her eyes. All right, Clara said, grabbing her hat. Don't want no trouble. Wait, Evelyn heard herself say, the word slipping out before she could stop it. Both Clara and the conductor turned, surprised. Evelyn's mind raced. She didn't know why she'd spoken, only that the thought of Clara disappearing into the coach car felt wrong, like a thread unraveling. I'll cover the difference, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. She stays. The conductor blinked, clearly weighing his options. Evelyn's name carried weight, and he knew it. After a moment he nodded curtly. Very well, Miss Harper. I'll adjust the fare. He moved on, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Clara sank back into the seat, her grin replaced by something softer, more curious. Didn't peg you for the generous type, she said, her tone probing. What's your angle? Evelyn busied herself with her purse, avoiding Clara's gaze. No angle, she said, though her heart pounded. I just don't like being told what to do. Clara chuckled, but her eyes lingered on Evelyn, searching. Fair enough. But you didn't have to do that, you know. I'd have been fine in coach. I know, Evelyn said, finally meeting her gaze. But I wanted to. The admission hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Evelyn felt exposed, as if she'd revealed more than she intended. Clara's expression softened further, and for a moment the world outside the train, the expectations, the rules, the weight of her father's legacy, faded away. The night stretched on, and the two women fell into an uneasy rhythm, trading stories to fill the silence. Clara spoke of Redstone, of herding cattle under starlit skies, of a life carved from hard work and freedom. Evelyn listened, captivated, her carefully guarded walls beginning to crack. In return, she shared fragments of her own world, boardroom battles, her father's unrelenting ambition, the suffocating pressure to marry a man she could never love. You ever think about runnin'? Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Just leaving it all behind? Evelyn's breath caught. She dreamed of it, late at night when the weight of her life felt unbearable. But dreams were one thing, saying it aloud was another. It's not that simple, she said, her voice tight. I have responsibilities. A legacy. Clara leaned closer, her eyes fierce. Legacy ain't worth a damn if it's killing you. The words hit Evelyn like a freight train, raw and unyielding. She wanted to argue, to defend the life she'd been groomed for. But something in Clara's gaze stopped her. It wasn't pity, it was understanding, and it shook her to her core. Before she could respond, the train slowed again, the brakes squealing as it approached a small station. Passengers stirred, gathering their belongings, but Evelyn barely noticed. Her world had narrowed to the woman across from her, to the dangerous pull she felt, like a tide dragging her toward something she couldn't name. Clara stood, stretching again. Gonna grab some air, she said, her tone casual but her eyes lingering. You comin'? Evelyn hesitated, her heart warring with her head. Every instinct screamed to stay put, to keep her distance, but the pull was too strong. She rose, smoothing her dress, and followed Clara into the cool night air, unaware that the choice would change everything. The platform was a sliver of wood and dust, lit by a single flickering lantern that cast long shadows across the empty station. The Montana night was crisp, the air sharp with the scent of pine and coal smoke. Evelyn stepped off the train behind Clara, her heels clicking against the planks, a stark contrast to the soft thud of Clara's boots. The other passengers milled about, their voices a low hum, but Evelyn felt as if she and Clara were alone in the world. Clara leaned against a weathered post, her silhouette framed by the starry sky. Better than that stuffy carriage, ain't it? She said, tilting her head back to gaze at the heavens. Evelyn hugged her arms against the chill, her silk dress offering little warmth. It's different, she admitted, her eyes drawn to Clara's profile. The strong jaw, the faint scar above her brow, the ease with which she inhabited the moment. Evelyn envied that freedom, that ability to exist without apology. You ain't used to this, are you? Clara asked, glancing over with a knowing smile. The open air, the quiet. Bet you spend most of your time in ballrooms and boardrooms. Evelyn bristled, but there was no malice in Clara's tone, only curiosity. I've seen plenty of the world, she said, though the words felt hollow. Her travels had been confined to private cars and luxury hotels, always under her father's watchful eye. This, standing on a desolate platform with a stranger who saw through her, was entirely new. Clara pushed off the post and stepped closer, her boots scuffing the wood. You ever just stop? She asked, her voice soft but piercing. Stop running from one thing to the next, trying to be what everyone expects? Evelyn's throat tightened. She wanted to deflect, to hide behind her usual armor of wit and poise, but Clara's gaze stripped her bare. I don't have that luxury, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. My father, he's built an empire. I'm expected to carry it forward. Clara's eyes softened, but she didn't look away. Sounds like a heavy load for one pair of shoulders. Evelyn swallowed, the weight of those words settling deep. She'd carried that load her entire life, but no one had ever acknowledged it, not like this. She turned away, staring at the train's gleaming exterior, its steel a symbol of everything she was tied to. It's what I was born for, she said, more to herself than to Clara. Maybe, Clara said, stepping closer still, her voice low and steady. But what were you born to want? The question hit like a spark to kindling, igniting something Evelyn had buried long ago. She'd spent years ignoring the ache in her chest, the longing for something, someone that didn't fit her father's plans. She danced with men at galas, smiled through proposals, all while knowing her heart lay elsewhere. But here, under the vast Montana sky, with Clara's eyes on her, that truth felt dangerously close to the surface. Before she could answer, a shout broke the quiet. "All aboard!" the conductor called, his voice echoing across the platform. Passengers began to shuffle back to the train, but Clara didn't move, her gaze still locked on Evelyn. "You comin'?" Clara asked, her tone light but her eyes serious. Evelyn nodded, her heart pounding as they boarded together. Back in the carriage, the air felt different, charged, alive. They settled into their seats, the space between them smaller now, both physically and otherwise. The train lurched forward, and Evelyn's hand brushed against Clara's on the armrest. Neither pulled away. As the night deepened, their conversation grew quieter, more intimate. Clara shared stories of her childhood, riding horses, sneaking whiskey from her father's stash, the time she outran a storm on the plains. Evelyn found herself laughing, something she rarely did so freely. In return, she spoke of her mother, who died when she was young, and the locket she wore, a keepsake that felt like her only tether to a softer past. "You miss her," Clara said, not a question but a statement, her voice gentle. Evelyn nodded, her fingers brushing the locket at her throat. "Every day." Clara reached out, her hand hovering near Evelyn's before settling back on her lap. "I lost my ma too," she said quietly. "Makes you feel like you're carrying a piece of him, don't it? Like you gotta make him proud." Evelyn's eyes stung and she looked away, blinking rapidly. No one had ever put it into words like that, not in a way that felt so true. She wanted to say something to bridge the gap between them, but the words wouldn't come. The train slowed again, this time for a longer stop at a larger station. Passengers bustled about and Clara stood, stretching. "Gonna grab something to eat," she said. "You want in?" Evelyn hesitated, then nodded. They stepped into the station's small diner, a cramped space filled with the smell of coffee and fried eggs. As they sat at a worn counter, their knees brushing under the table, Evelyn felt a shift. This wasn't just a chance encounter anymore. It was something more, something that scared and thrilled her in equal measure. The diner was a world apart from the first-class carriage, its chipped formica counter and flickering fluorescent lights, a stark contrast to the polished luxury Evelyn knew. She sat across from Clara, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee, the warmth grounding her as she stole glances at the woman opposite. Clara was tearing into a plate of eggs and bacon with the same unapologetic ease she brought to everything, her fork moving with a rhythm that felt like a challenge to Evelyn's restraint. "You eat like you're starving," Evelyn said, a teasing edge to her voice. Clara grinned, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "Work a day on a ranch and you'd eat like this too. Ain't no time for dainty bites when you're wrangling cattle." Evelyn laughed, surprising herself with the sound. Felt foreign, like a language she'd forgotten. She sipped her coffee, watching Clara over the rim of her mug. There was something magnetic about her. The way she moved, the way she spoke, the way she seemed to live without fear of judgment. Evelyn envied it, craved it, even as it terrified her. "So," Clara said, leaning back in her stool, her eyes glinting with mischief, "what's a railroad princess like you really doing on this train? Ain't just business, I'm guessing." Evelyn's fingers tightened around her mug. She told herself this trip was about proving herself to her father, about stepping into the role of heiress with authority. But sitting here, with Clara's gaze peeling back her defenses, she couldn't lie. "I needed to get away," she admitted, her voice low. "From Chicago." From everything. Clara's expression softened, but she didn't press. Instead, she leaned forward, her voice conspiratorial. You ever do something just 'cause it feels right? No plan, no reason, just you. Evelyn's heart skipped. She wanted to say yes, to claim some piece of that reckless freedom, but the truth was every move she'd ever made had been calculated, weighed against her father's expectations and society's rules. Not really, she said, her voice barely audible. Not until now. Clara's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment neither spoke. The diner's noise faded, the clatter of dishes, the hum of conversation, until it was just them, suspended in a fragile electric moment. Evelyn's pulse raced, her mind screaming at her to pull back, to retreat to safety, but her body leaned forward, drawn to Clara like a magnet. Back on board, the carriage felt smaller, the air thicker. They sat in silence for a while, the rhythm of the train a steady heartbeat beneath their feet. Evelyn's mind churned, torn between the pull she felt toward Clara and the fear of what it meant. She'd grown up in a world where women like her, women who felt the way she did, were whispered about, judged, hidden away. She'd buried those feelings, locked them behind a mask of perfection, but Clara was unraveling that mask with every glance, every word. You're thinking hard over there, Clara said, breaking the silence. She was leaning back, her hat tilted low, but her eyes were sharp, watching Evelyn closely. Evelyn forced a smile. Just wondering what Seattle's like. Clara raised an eyebrow, clearly not buying it. Sure, she said, her tone gentle but knowing. But if you ever want to say what's really on your mind, I'm here. The offer was simple, but it hit Evelyn like a tidal wave. No one had ever invited her to be honest. Not like this, without expectation or judgment. She wanted to spill everything, to tell Clara about the nights she'd lain awake, imagining a life where she could love freely, where she wasn't bound by duty or fear. But the words stayed locked in her throat, too heavy to speak. The train slowed again, pulling into another station, and the carriage filled with the bustle of passengers. Clara stood, stretching, and Evelyn's eyes followed her, lingering on the curve of her shoulders, the confidence in her stride. She felt a pang of longing so sharp it stole her breath. Gonna stretch my legs, Clara said, glancing back. You stayin'? Evelyn nodded, her voice caught somewhere deep inside. As Clara disappeared down the aisle, Evelyn leaned back, her fingers brushing the locket at her throat. She felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, and Clara was the wind urging her to jump. The train's rhythm had become a lullaby, but Evelyn couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, the glass cool against her cheek as the landscape blurred into a tapestry of moonlight and shadow. Clara was back in her seat, Evelyn's seat, technically, but the fight over it felt distant now, a spark that had ignited something far bigger. Clara was dozing, her hat tipped over her eyes, her chest rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. Evelyn watched her, a quiet ache blooming in her chest. She'd never felt this before, this pull, this need to be near someone, to know them in a way that went beyond words. It wasn't just Clara's boldness or her beauty, though both were undeniable. It was the way she saw Evelyn, not as an heiress or a harper, but as a person flawed and human. It was terrifying and exhilarating, like stepping into a world where the rules she'd lived by no longer applied. A sudden jolt of the train snapped Evelyn from her thoughts. Clara stirred, blinking awake, and their eyes met. For a moment neither spoke, the air thick with unspoken questions. Then Clara smiled, soft and unguarded, and Evelyn's heart stuttered. You're still up, Clara said, her voice husky from sleep. Something keeping you awake? Evelyn hesitated, her fingers twisting the locket at her throat. Just thinking, she said, the words inadequate for the storm inside her. Clara sat up, her gaze steady. About what? Evelyn's mouth went dry. She wanted to lie, to deflect, but Clara's eyes held her, demanding truth. You, she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. The admission felt like a confession, raw and reckless, and she braced for Clara's reaction. Clara's smile faded, replaced by something deeper, more serious. She leaned forward, her elbows on her knees, closing the distance between them. That's so, she said, her voice low, almost a challenge. And what about me's got you so wound up? Evelyn's pulse raced, her mind screaming at her to retreat, but her heart wouldn't let her. "You're different," she said, fumbling for words. "You don't care what anyone thinks. You're free in a way I've never been." Clara's eyes softened, but there was a fire in them too. "Ain't nobody free, Evelyn," she said. "Not really. But you get to choose what chains you wear." The words hit hard, stripping away the last of Evelyn's defenses. She thought of her father's empire, the marriage proposals, the life she was expected to lead. Those were her chains, heavy and unyielding. But here with Clara she glimpsed something else. A life where she could choose, where she could be herself. Before she could respond, the train screeched to a halt, the brakes screaming louder than before. Passengers gasped and Evelyn gripped the armrest as the carriage tilted slightly, then settled. The conductor's voice boomed through the car, urgent this time. "Ladies and gentlemen, stay calm. We've hit a mechanical issue. Please remain seated." Clara was on her feet in an instant, her expression sharp. "That don't sound good," she said, glancing out the window. Evelyn followed her gaze, seeing nothing but darkness and the faint outline of trees. "Stay here," Clara said, grabbing her hat. "I'm gonna see what's what." Evelyn's hand shot out, catching Clara's wrist. "Don't," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. "It's not safe." Clara looked down at her, surprised, then grinned. "Worried about me, Heiress?" Evelyn flushed, releasing her wrist. "Just be careful." Clara's grin softened into something warmer, and she gave a small nod before heading down the aisle. Evelyn watched her go, her heart pounding. The carriage buzzed with nervous chatter, but she barely heard it, her mind fixed on Clara, on the way her touch had lingered, on the truth she'd spoken. Minutes stretched into an eternity before Clara returned, her face grim. "Engine's overheated," she said, sliding back into her seat. "They're working on it, but we're stuck for a while." Evelyn exhaled, relief mingling with frustration. "Great," she muttered. "Just what I needed." Clara chuckled, leaning back. "Ain't so bad. Gives us more time to talk." Evelyn's lips twitched, almost a smile. "You're impossible," she said, but there was no heat in it. They talked through the night, their voices low, their words weaving a fragile bridge between them. Clara spoke of her dreams, to own her own ranch someday, to live on her terms. Evelyn shared her own quieter dreams, of a life where she could be more than her father's daughter, where she could love without fear. As dawn broke, painting the carriage in soft pinks and golds, Evelyn realized something had shifted. The space between them wasn't just physical anymore. It was emotional, a connection that felt both inevitable and impossible. She didn't know what came next, but for the first time she wasn't afraid to find out. The train was still motionless as morning light flooded the carriage, turning the polished wood golden. Evelyn and Clara sat closer now, their knees nearly touching, the space between them alive with unspoken tension. The other passengers were restless, their murmurs a constant hum, but Evelyn barely noticed. Her world had narrowed to Clara, to the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed, the way her voice carried the cadence of the plains. "You ever been in love?" Clara asked suddenly, her tone casual but her gaze piercing. Evelyn's breath caught, her fingers tightening around her locket. The question was a blade, cutting straight to the heart of her. She danced around love her whole life, deflecting suitors, burying her desires under layers of duty. But Clara's question demanded honesty, and Evelyn was tired of hiding. "No," she said finally, her voice soft but steady. "Not the way you mean." Clara tilted her head, studying her. "But you've wanted to," she said, not a question but a statement laced with understanding. Evelyn's heart pounded, her mind screaming at her to stop, to retreat, but her body leaned closer, drawn to Clara's warmth. "Yes," she whispered, the word a release, a confession. "But it's complicated." Clara's lips curved, not in her usual teasing grin but in something softer, more vulnerable. "Ain't it always," she said. "Love's never simple, especially when the world's watching." Evelyn swallowed, her throat tight. She knew what Clara meant, the weight of judgment, the whispers, the rules that bound them both. But here in this stalled train, those rules felt distant. like a storm on the horizon that hadn't yet broken. Before she could respond, a commotion erupted at the front of the carriage. A man in a suit, his face red with anger, was arguing with the conductor. "This is unacceptable," he shouted. "I have business in Seattle. Fix this damn train." The conductor's voice was calm but strained. "We're doing all we can, sir. The engine needs time to cool." Clara rolled her eyes, leaning back in her seat. "City folk," she muttered, a smirk playing on her lips. "Always in a hurry to nowhere." Evelyn laughed, the sound easing the tension in her chest. "Not all of us," she said, meeting Clara's gaze. "Some of us are starting to see the point of slowing down." Clara's smirk softened into a smile, and for a moment, the world outside the train ceased to exist. Evelyn felt bold, reckless, like she could say anything, be anything. She reached out, her hand brushing Clara's, a tentative touch that sent a spark through her veins. Clara didn't pull away, her fingers curling slightly, inviting more. The moment was shattered by the conductor's voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be moving shortly. Please prepare to resume travel." Passengers cheered, but Evelyn felt a pang of disappointment. The train stillness had given her and Clara a bubble, a space where they could be honest, unguarded. Now, with the world rushing back in, she wasn't sure what came next. As the train lurched forward, Clara's hand slipped away, but her eyes stayed on Evelyn, warm and steady. "We got a few hours left to Seattle," she said, her voice low. "Plenty of time to figure things out." Evelyn nodded, her heart racing. She didn't know what things meant, but she wanted to find out. The rest of the journey passed in a blur of conversation and quiet moments, each glance and touch building a bridge between them. By the time the train pulled into Seattle, Evelyn felt like she was stepping into a new world, one where she could be more than an heiress, more than her father's daughter. They stepped onto the platform together, the city's bustle a sharp contrast to the intimacy of the train. Clara adjusted her hat, her eyes scanning the crowd. "Guess this is where we part ways," she said, but her tone held a question, a hope. Evelyn's chest tightened. She wasn't ready to let go, not of Clara, not of this feeling. "It doesn't have to be," she said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her. "Come with me. Just for a day." Clara's eyes widened, then softened. "You sure about that, Heiress?" Evelyn smiled, a real smile, unguarded and free. "I've never been more sure." Seattle's streets were alive with the hum of progress, trolleys clanging, vendors shouting, the air thick with the scent of salt and industry. Evelyn led Clara through the chaos, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and exhilaration. She'd invited Clara to stay on a whim, a reckless choice that felt like the truest thing she'd ever done. Clara walked beside her, her boots scuffing the cobblestones, her eyes wide as she took in the city's sprawl. "This place is something else," Clara said, her voice tinged with awe. "Makes Redstone look like a speck of dust." Evelyn smiled, glancing at her. "It's overwhelming at first, but you get used to it." Clara raised an eyebrow, her grin returning. "Don't think I want to get used to it. Too much noise for my taste." They checked into a modest hotel, Evelyn insisting on paying despite Clara's protests. The room was simple but clean, with a view of the harbor and the distant mountains. As they settled in, Evelyn felt the weight of her decision settle over her. She'd crossed a line, inviting Clara into her world, and there was no going back. That night they sat on the balcony, the city's lights glittering below. Clara leaned back, her hands behind her head, her eyes on the stars. "You ever think about what happens next?" she asked, her voice soft but serious. "After all this?" Evelyn's throat tightened. She'd been avoiding that question, focusing instead on the moment, on Clara. But the truth was her life was waiting. Her father, the railroad, the expectations she'd never escape. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've never had a choice before." Clara turned to her, her eyes fierce. "You got one now," she said. "You don't have to go back to that cage." Evelyn's heart ached, torn between the life she knew and the one she wanted. She reached for Clara's hand, their fingers intertwining, and for the first time, she let herself imagine a future where she could be free, where she could love Clara without fear. The next day they explored the city together, their laughter echoing through markets and along the waterfront. But the shadow of Evelyn's responsibilities loomed, growing darker with each passing hour. Her father had arranged a meeting with investors, a chance to prove herself as his heir. She knew she couldn't run forever. That evening, as they sat by the harbor, Clara spoke, her voice steady but heavy. "I ain't gonna pretend I know your world, Evelyn," she said. "But I know you're more than what they want you to be. You gotta choose what makes you happy." Evelyn's eyes stung, and she squeezed Clara's hand. "And if that's you?" she asked, her voice breaking. Clara smiled, her eyes shining with tears. "Then we'll figure it out. Together." The next morning, Evelyn stood before the investors, her father's shadow looming large. She spoke with confidence, outlining plans for the railroad, but her heart wasn't in it. All she could think of was Clara waiting outside, her presence a promise of something more. When the meeting ended, Evelyn found Clara by the hotel, her bag slung over her shoulder. "You did it," Clara said, her grin proud. "Told him who's boss, didn't you?" Evelyn laughed, but it was bittersweet. "I did what I had to," she said. "But I'm done living for them." Clara's eyes widened, hope flickering in them. "What are you saying?" Evelyn took a deep breath, her decision made. "I'm saying I choose you," she said, her voice steady. "I don't know what comes next, but I want it to be with you." Clara's grin was brighter than the sun, and she pulled Evelyn into a fierce embrace, their laughter mingling with the sound of the city. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time Evelyn felt free. Not just from her father's empire, but from the fear that had held her back. They left Seattle together, not as heiress and ranch girl, but as two women forging their own path. The train that had brought them together was a distant memory, but its tracks had led them here, to a love that defied the world's rules, to a future they would build on their own terms.